Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this coming through at all? Hello? It's loud enough? Okay, very good. Thanks. Well, I'm very honored to be here today. I'm very honored that Global Sources asked me to come and talk to you today a little bit about my experiences with sourcing and finding suppliers and manufacturing products and product development, a lot of the things I've been doing. So I'm happy to be here. Rather than spend a lot of time on the presentation, I will go through it quickly, but I prefer that you ask me your questions because I think that we all learn more with your specific questions. My topic today is a little bit general in nature, but that's so that it can meet the needs of a lot of different people. So I hope at the end of my presentation you'll have lots of questions. So today we're going to talk about a few things. Really best practices for manufacturing, and it all starts with not only your design, your ideas and your concepts, but really finding the right supplier that's going to be a good fit for you. Because if you do all the hard work up front to get the right supply chain in place to begin with, it's going to pay off dividends much later down the line. So we're going to talk about a few things that you can do to ensure that when you're looking for suppliers and finding suppliers and managing suppliers, that you do the right things to protect yourself, protect your designs and your IP, to help you get the quality right, and protect yourself if at the chance that things do go wrong. So let's get started. First, just a little bit quickly about me, introduction. Why should you guys be listening to me? I have something like, 25 years now in manufacturing, a degree in mechanical engineering, and I've been on all sides. I've worked in the factories as a process engineer. I've worked in sales and sold to factories, and now I'm a buyer buying from suppliers in China. So I bring a unique bit of experience having been in many different realms and can understand the point of view of each of those different entities, because they're obviously all quite different and they all have different points of view, but having spent time in each one of those, I think it allows me to understand where they're coming from. So I think that helps with explaining to you about what we're talking about today. As I said, I have Garvin Sourcing, product design, product development, and finding and managing suppliers. I also consult with PassageMaker. PassageMaker is a group of companies that are very helpful, and a lot of information, a lot of free information about how to source, how to find suppliers, how to manage suppliers, how to write contracts, how to not be taken advantage of in China. So a lot of good information at some of these companies with PassageMaker, Asia Bridge Law for legal services, and the China Sourcing Academy. Lots of good information there if you have more questions after the show. I live by the don't hope credence. If after this show you've walked around, you've talked to all these suppliers, or you've been dealing with China looking for the right suppliers, if you have to hope that the suppliers understand all of your requirements, if you have to hope that they're going to get the quality right, if you have to hope that when you make a payment it's going to the right factory and nothing's going to happen, your deposit, if you have to hope that your IP is not going to be taken advantage of, you've already lost in China. So the things I'm going to talk about today are, rather than hope things don't work out right, how to confirm and get ahead of the game so that you protect yourself. And remember, it's a very long road. I'm sure many of you know, if you're here to design, develop your own product and get it manufactured, it's a long road to go from that initial idea that you had over a beer and getting it on the shelves at Walmart. So nothing is easy, but it can be done here. And if you protect yourself, you're going to be way ahead of the curve. Before I jump right into the things I want to talk about today, I wanted to talk a little bit about how the landscape of China as a manufacturing base has changed quite a bit. I came to China in 2003, so I've been here now about 14 years. And I came here, I'd never even been to Asia, much less China. So it was a very overwhelming at the time to get on a plane with a round trip ticket and just come here with everything I had in 3 suitcases, not knowing a thing about China. Couldn't even say hello in Chinese. but I learned a lot in those times. But it was very different back in those days. You know, in 2003, 2004, it was easy to find suppliers. Even Shenzhen, there was lots of suppliers, but you know, it wasn't the high technology epicenter that it is now. Believe me, it was dirty, it was gritty. You know, there was lots of injection molding and metal fabrication and stamping and plating, and very, very different than it is today. Dongguan was, as far as you could see, factories doing everything and anything. Then things happened in China. 2008, financial crisis happened. There was a lot of those suppliers. While there were many good ones, there was also a lot of bad ones. And a lot of those suppliers, you know, maybe they were in business to be good manufacturers. Some of them were just in business to make money so they could get into the real estate business. So the good thing is that a lot of those bad suppliers are no longer around. The good news is that, or I should say, the bad news is that there's less suppliers, more good ones, but there's less suppliers. So there's more competition for those suppliers. So it makes it a little more difficult to find the right suppliers for you. Another good trend is that, you know, contracts are finally starting to mean something. You know, again, back in the old days, people would say, oh, why do I even need an NDA? Why do I even need a purchase order contract? It's not worth the paper it's written on. Well, I would highly recommend that today you take contracts very seriously, that you take IP protection very seriously, because now the landscape has changed in China. The Chinese government, because of now they've got their own big companies that are interested about IPs. So now China takes IP serious, and you can get a very fair shake if for heaven forbid something does go wrong and you need to go to litigation. Please know, as a foreigner, and I know there's a lot probably mainland people here as well, but it's a much fairer playing field now from a legal standpoint of view. So if you do need legal help or take issues to litigation, it's much the playing field is much fairer these days. And sort of with that as well, you know, before, if you look at any tour guide book, the Coming to China, it's all about, they mentioned guanxi. That's, you know, who do you know and what can they do for you, right? And in the past, you know, that's how business got done. There's a lot of state-owned enterprises, and, you know, the owners of the factory, you know, they knew the local mayor, who knew the guys when the parts got exported. There was a lot of interaction with people. Today, if someone says, hey, you know, my uncle's brother works at the trade office, and, you know, we can get a better rate on this or that. Today, guanxi can actually be detrimental and be dangerous, because there's no contract on guanxi. If someone says they're going to get you a great price, if they say, oh, you know, my uncle works at the Apple factory at Foxconn, and, you know, we can get a great price on iPads, run away, because that no longer works in China. Obviously, you want to have good relationships with your suppliers. You know, I have lots of good suppliers, good friends, but it's a business relationship and not relying on them to get something done. Balanced economy. You know, as I said in the first one, you know, there's less suppliers. There's more good ones, but there's less suppliers, and there's more competition for those suppliers. Before, you know, export was the only game in town. All the factories in China that were making products, it was all for export. But now that there's a growing middle class in China, consumerism is up in China, so that creates even more competition for factories, because now, rather than making products for export, they are more focused on their domestic economy and markets. So that creates more competition to find the right suppliers. Finally, you know, another trend that's also had a big impact, especially on manufacturing. Now, fortunately, as I said, you know, Shenzhen has become the epicenter of technology. So a lot of the people that are here today, a lot of the good technology factories that can produce new products, you know, they're actually still in Shenzhen. But a lot of the other factories, they've all moved. They've moved to places like Chongqing and Chengdu and Anhui, and lots of places that, you know, they're not as easily accessible to get there. English is not spoken as readily as it might be here in Shenzhen and in Guangdong. The other problem that causes is that those suppliers that were here 10, 15 years ago that finally got their supply chain in place, that finally got their quality right, that really had a good labor force in here, now because of all these pressures, higher labor rates, higher rents, taxes, and the Chinese government just wanting to clean up the environment, they've forced all these factories now to move. So they've had to uproot their factories. You know, some maybe managers didn't leave. They've had to get a new workforce. They've had to put a new supply chain in place. So that's created a lot of problems where they've had to go back and start all over again and to recreate what they had before. So those are some of the general issues that have affected the way that you source and manufacture in China. So I just wanted to put that up there and give a little history about that. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is really general in nature, finding the right supplier, doing your due diligence, getting the quality right, monitoring those suppliers so you know what's going on, and then protecting yourself with purchase order contracts, with tooling contracts, and your IP. So it's important to have a roadmap, like I said, from going to that initial product concept to getting the product design, getting the design for manufacturing right, and then going through all the steps of finding the supplier, all the way through the end till you've got product that you're shipping to Amazon or Walmart. So, but if you have a clear roadmap and you go through the steps and you're methodical about it and you do your due diligence, it can be done. So the first step really is finding the right supplier, and that begins with knowing your product. I mean, obviously most of you do, but by that what I mean is, have you really specified all of the components in your product if you're looking to manufacture a product? And I'll just say, obviously some of you want to manufacture your own engineer design product with your own IP, or some of you are here just looking to buy off-the-shelf items, but the process is really the same. So it doesn't matter if you've got your own design, or your own product, or you're wanting to buy off the shelf. If you do these things, you're going to protect yourself in the long run. But making sure that whether it's an engineered design product or just something you want to buy, being very clear, what are the specifications for that product? What are the bill of materials? What are the dimensions and tolerances? What are the colors? What are the Pantone colors? So the more clearly you can define what it is that you're trying to manufacture or buy, the more chance you're going to have to get what you want at the end of the day. So with that in mind, you want to use that criteria when you're looking for your supplier. Can they produce that product? Do they have the capacity to do it? Do they have the equipment and then technology? Do they have the trained labor force? Where are they located? Like I said, now they're in Shenzhen for technology, but maybe you got to go to Chengdu. So that's going to have an impact. If you want to visit your supplier every 3 weeks, it's a lot more difficult sometimes to get to some of these inner China cities. So take a lot of this into account as you start to formulate your plan on finding the right partner, for your product and putting your supply chain in place. And another key aspect that I want to point out is, make sure that you are the right fit for the supplier and the supplier is the right fit for you. Make sure that that if it's a very large factory and you're coming in, you're only going to buy a few hundred or a few thousand products, maybe they're not the best fit. A general rule of thumb is at any point during the production, you want to be somewhere around 5 to 30% of that factory's business and capacity at that given time. Because any smaller than that, you run the potential risk of having delays or not being taken seriously. After you've found those list of potential suppliers that you'd think you'd like to work with or you'd like to buy their products from, do your due diligence. Make sure that you really check out those suppliers. Are they really good suppliers? Can they really make the products that you want? What is their history? What are their markets? Who are they selling to? Can they give you references? If they can't give you one good reference, be very wary of that. It's a red flag. As a sales guy, I would love to have happy references that I could recommend. Yes, please talk to these guys in Germany. Please talk to these guys in Australia. And if they say, well, we can't disclose our customer list because of IP concerns and confidentiality. Say, hey, well, listen, I'm not in the Australian market. I'm from the USA, but they should be able to at least recommend one happy customer that you could talk to. And if they do, follow up with them, call them. Sometimes they might say, yeah, they're a great supplier to work with. Sometimes they might say, no, I had a lot of problems. You might not want to work with them. Link performance to payments, and I'll get to that a little bit later in the contracts, but one thing you want to do always is, we're going to talk about payment terms and milestones and things like that in the production process, so making sure that the payments are linked to those is a very important step. And the other thing is, who are you paying? A lot of times in China, there will be a manufacturing company in the mainland, and then for reasons being able to accept foreign funds or having another company, maybe they're located in Hong Kong where the bank is. So you want to be very diligent about knowing who am I paying, and if something goes wrong, making sure that you know where are the assets. So if the assets are at the factory in China, but you're paying someone in Hong Kong, unless you know very clearly who all the entities are involved, if there is an issue or a problem, it can be very difficult to link all the dots together. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Supplier blacklist is a good website to use. They list a lot of poor performing suppliers. You can go there and search and see if there's been any negative reviews about that. I like to look at it sometimes. Take it with a grain of salt. Maybe someone just got unhappy with their supplier, but there are some really good information on there about suppliers. So if, again, check that supplier. If they have ISO certifications, if they have CE certifications, whatever's important to you, if they show those to you, verify them. At the bottom of every certificate, there is the governing board or whoever did the inspection, and there's a reference number, for their license. Check it out. Is it legitimate? Is it real? I can't tell you how many times I've gone to factories in Dongguan or wherever, ISO 9001 certified, but anybody can get a sign and put it on the side of their factory. Verify the verifications. Factory audits are very good source. If you have a lot of different suppliers in your supply chain, they're spread out in different places. Some of these, third-party quality control groups are very good at going to the factory and auditing them, and, letting you know, what is the business, how big is the business, what sort of capacity do they have, what sort of equipments do they have, are they ISO registered, and so forth. So it's a good, cheap way to do some initial due diligence on these suppliers. And remember, in the USA, we have something called the Better Business Bureau. Well, in China, there's no BBBB. There's no Beijing Better Business Bureau. There's no safety net here. When you go out into China, you're on your own. It's up to you to protect yourself in terms of contracts, in terms of your IP, in terms of your finances. There's no one there that you can go to in the event that there is a problem. So remember that, no safety net. The last thing about that is when doing the due diligence, you can send emails, make phone calls, have someone go and check them out. But really, the best way to do it is go there for yourself, see it with your own eyes, walk the factory floor. Do they have this equipment? Do they have the clean room? Can they make PCBAs? Do they have an assembly line that they can make the product? I went back to that supplier blacklist, and I read on there that something like 80% of all buyers that have problems with their suppliers in China never visited the factory even once. So it's like the single most thing you can do. I know that a lot of you here in Hong Kong, and it's easy to go to Shenzhen, but again, if your supplier's up in Anhui or Chengdu, it's a little harder to get there, but it's well worth the time to go. The next step is, once you've found a few suppliers, now you want to start to whittle it down a little bit. How do we do that? Well, obviously you're going to ask them for pricing. So you want to be able to compare apples to apples. So you want to ask each supplier for your product, quote in the same way, quote the same order quantities, the same minimum order quantities, the same Incoterms, FOB Shenzhen, Yantian, FOB Shanghai, whatever. But you want to be very clear to all the suppliers as well. In the very beginning, if you say, I want a price on 5,000 of these units, okay, they're going to give you a price for 5,000. But if then you say, well, okay, my quality requirements are that I want 100% testing on every component. I want an incoming quality control. I want 100% in-process inspection at these 3 steps. I want 100% testing after the final assembly, rather than random inspection. So those sort of things that, if that's important to you, be very clear with your supplier about that up front, because that's going to affect your price. Don't ask for a price for 5,000 units and then tell him, well, you need to inspect 10 times every step of the way, because that's not fair to the supplier, and you want to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples with the different suppliers based on your exact quality and testing and packaging requirements. Making sure that if you need certifications or you need to check components in the bill of material, especially for electronics, if you want to check all the components on the PCBA to make sure that they're certified, that they're actual, IBM chips or Samsung chips or whatever. Again, that those need to be clearly communicated to your supplier to begin with. Or, if an acceptable equivalent component is acceptable, okay, that's fine too. But be very clear, if it has to be an exact component, that's all you can accept, because maybe one chip might cost this much from the actual supplier, but if there's an equivalent one, maybe it's a little less. So the suppliers, they might try to switch, quote one and then replace it with the other. So be very clear about the specifications in the bill of material. Once you have the RFQ done and now you have your pricing, you can start to see what is the cost going to be for your product, either off the shelf or if you're designing it. If you're designing it and building your own product, perhaps there's tooling involved. So you want to be able, obviously, factor in the cost of tooling with the overall cost of what your product's going to be in your supply chain. But once you're ready to actually move forward with samples or get to production, getting tooling made, don't assume that your supplier is going to be a good project manager. Generally, most of them aren't. First of all, they don't like to tell you bad news. They don't like to say no. So in many cases, if something is going to come up that's going to affect your lead times or the production, or there's going to cause a problem, many times they might be slow to tell you this news. So you have to be very proactive on your own. And you can do that very easily. Just, you can have a system. You can just use an Excel sheet, but be very diligent about it. Set up a time every week where you're going to call Mr. Wong and say, hey, Mr. Wong, at 10:30 on every Wednesday, we're going to have a meeting. We're going to go through all the tasks that are related to the current production, and we're going to go over each one until they're closed out. Because I don't want to know that if you've given me a lead time of 40 days and I need this material that takes 25 days to procure, I don't want to wait till day 30 to find that material never got ordered. So if it's important to the manufacturing process or the production process, be very clear. What is the task? Who is responsible for it? Is it you? Is it your supplier? Is it his buyer? Is it his QC manager? Put a name in there so you know who is responsible for that task. When is it going to be completed? What's the update? And if there is a problem, what is the problem? What's the root cause of that problem? How are we going to solve it? And how are we going to get back on schedule? Be very diligent. Don't say, well, this Wednesday, everything's going fine. We talked last week and nothing's going to happen for the next 2 weeks. Don't get into that rut where you don't call them up. Even if there's no update, call just so that they know everyone is still on the same page. Now, the quality, getting the quality right. As I said, in the beginning, if you can be very specific with what you want for your product to begin with, whether off the shelf or if you've designed it for yourself, the more specific you can be with those quality requirements, the criteria that you can accept and how you're going to measure and test that, the better off it's going to be. Don't just say that, hey, I'm buying a flower vase and it can have no surface scratches or imperfections. Well, that doesn't work. You have to be very clear. The vase can only have, a scratch of 1 centimeter within 1 square centimeter area, and it's going to be inspected by an inspector holding it at arm's length under natural light at 45 degrees. So you have to be very specific on what the criteria is, how you're going to test it, and then what the acceptance is going to be. If you can do all of that for the entire bill of material, you're going to have a much better chance of there not being quality issues, or not forgetting that, I didn't tell them that they should check when they push the on button, that the green light should flash 3 times and then turn yellow. I forgot to tell them to do that. So make sure that anything that's important with the form or functionality of your product has been very clearly specified. And as I said before, when we have the payment terms, that the quality and the functionality of your product is clearly tied to those criteria and milestones. Do never pay full payment until the product has been inspected and verified, and you're completely happy with the performance of the product. Because as I said, no safety net, and once it leaves China, it's virtually impossible or cost prohibitive to bring it back for rework or replacement. Or it's going to cost you time and money, and it may cost you with your customers. So once it leaves China, it's too late. Again, as I said, it's best if you come to China and have your eyes on it every step of the way. But if you can't be here all the time, these third-party QC, at least they can come in and put their eyeballs on the product to make sure it's right. I don't like to use them quite as often for more highly technical products, because their job is to go in there and inspect the product, make sure the quantity is right, and they're going to do basic checks according to the criteria that you've communicated to them. But in terms of following up and asking questions and being more of a project manager for you, that's not their role. So if you need that level of communication and monitoring with your suppliers, then I encourage you to go there and do the inspection yourself. So finally, how do you protect yourself? You've done all the right things. You've found the right supplier. You've done the due diligence. You're managing them and monitoring them. You've put forth all your quality control requirements. So now how do you protect yourself in the event that something does go wrong, or you're worried about your intellectual property? First of all, make sure every step of the way that you have a legitimately signed bilingual contract, ideally generated by a law team in China. That's the best way to protect yourself. So for purchase orders, be very clear. Here's what I'm ordering. I'm ordering 5,000 pieces of this product with this special criteria, with this testing procedures. Again, the purchase order might be 10 pages long, but put all of those specifications and requirements in there. And like I said, the factory that's making it, they need to be clearly on there. Who is the manager? Here's their address. Here's their name in Chinese, not just Pinyin, not Happy Valley Factory, in Chinese characters. So you know very clearly who is the supplier and where the assets are. Have them chop it with their formal factory chop. And as I mentioned earlier, if payments don't accept that, and it's hard for us to get the money out of our bank account. It'd be easier if you paid Mr. Wong's private account, or you need to send the money to this bank in another location. Don't accept that unless you clearly define who is receiving the payment, who's making the product, and all of those people's names are on the purchase order, and each one of them sign and chop it. So that way, if there is an issue with quality, or there's a question about payments later, there's a clear paper trail of who is doing what and who received the money. Also put in there, they've said the lead time is going to be 45 days. Okay, put that in the purchase order as well. And also put ramifications for that. If the lead time is 45 days, if we're late, don't accept it's just late. Say, For every day late, it's 1% penalty. I want a rebate of 1%, or you're going to give me a discount. Put actual teeth into it so that it gives them more motivation not to miss lead times, not to miss key milestones. If you're having custom tooling made, have a separate purchase order for that as well. Again, who's making it? Is your supplier making it? Is he outsourcing it to a tooling manufacturer down the street? Again, have all their names on there, know where the tooling's being made. Get your name on there. This tool belongs to Corporation ABC at XXX address. It was made on this date. Here's the serial number. Make sure that they put that on the tool. I like, if I'm having a tool made, a custom tool, I like to put a signifying mark somewhere in an out-of-the-way place, like maybe your logo. Maybe you put that on the inside of each plastic part that goes into the housing. So that way you can see if there is some funny business down the road, you can easily look at it and say, hey, this part was made from the tool that I bought and had made. And now I'm seeing it sold at a trade show or on Taobao or something else. So not only put the name of all your assets and put labels on the tooling, but maybe put some sort of a special logo on the part itself. Since a lot of you are here and you're very interested in electronic products, be very knowledgeable about the what I want to say. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But the compliance requirements for your own hometown. So if it's, if you're buying something that's highly regulated, like medical devices or children's toys or products for children. So don't expect that your supplier is going to know all the regulations for every country in the world. Part of the criteria in finding the right supplier is if you are purchasing highly compliant products, you want to make sure that they do have export experience and perhaps have experience selling into the markets that you are going to be in. But remember, it's not the supplier's requirement to know all of this. It's you as the importer has to very clearly understand all of your compliance requirements. As I said, make sure that wherever you're sending your contracts, wherever you're sending your money, make that the area of jurisdiction. A lot of people, especially from the States, they have NDAs signed, and they were written by a law firm up in New York City, and they put New York City as the area of jurisdiction. Well, that's not going to do anything for you if your supplier is in Shenzhen. So again, you want to make sure when the contracts are written up that you put the area of jurisdiction that covers wherever your supplier that has the assets, that has the factory, that has your tooling. You want it in that location. And as I said, payments linked to performance. If it's 30% down, 7% at shipment, 30, 40, 30, whatever, you want to check that each milestone has been achieved and meets all of your requirements, and then you make the payment. And finally, the written QC plan. As I said, go through and write your own QC plan. Don't rely on that supplier that he knows everything about your product or what's important to you. Whatever you want and what's important in your QC and your inspection criteria and your testing and the way that your product is going to be packaged, that's part of the purchase order contract. So make sure that that's in there as well. And finally, as I said, very important in red, make sure that the name of the person that you're paying is the same name on the factory, it's the same name on the business license, and it's the same name on the bank account. If it's not, make sure all entities are included in the contract and they've all signed and chopped it. So if you've done all these things right, you should have a very good sourcing experience. There's always going to be problems. There's always going to be issues that come up. That's manufacturing. But the key is if you've done your homework, if you've done your due diligence, if you've got your quality requirements, then it's going to make it a lot easier to deal with those problems when they arrive. You're going to have a better sense of reliability about your supplier. You're going to have a better feeling about the quality requirements being met, and you don't have to hope that things work out. You've confirmed them. I'm not a lawyer, but I like to just briefly mention, as I said, these U.S. style NDAs, typically they don't really work. Either they're not bilingual, the area of jurisdiction is not in the right city or province, and they're only non-disclosures, which means, Mr. Supplier, don't tell anyone else about my idea or my product. That doesn't really protect you, because in his supply chain, he's going to be telling lots of people about your tooling or this component or that component, or buying from this supplier in his sub-supplier's supply chain. So NDAs, don't really protect you. You can sign it and think you feel good about it, but that doesn't really mean that your supplier is not going to be telling many other people about what your product is. One way I like to kind of prevent that, I should have mentioned it earlier and I didn't, but during the RFQ process, if you have very special, highly special intellectual property, or you've got a special design, you don't necessarily have to disclose all of that during the initial RFQ process. Just show them a little bit of the product. Just show them maybe not all of the plastic components that you need tooling on. Don't show them the special sauce until you've narrowed it down and you really get to the point where this is the supplier I'm going to work with. Or show him something. Again, it's all about comparing the apples to apples. So it doesn't matter if they give you the exact price in the beginning. Don't focus on the price, but it allows you to determine which of the suppliers will be good for you. So you don't always have to disclose all of your IP in the very, very beginning. Wait till you've narrowed down to that 1 or 2 suppliers that you're going to work with. But having said all that, the NDAs don't really work. What you want is called an NNN. And again, ideally generated by a law firm in China, where N stands for non-use, non-disclosure, and non-circumvention. So non-disclosure is a part of that, but really non-use, meaning not only do you not tell someone about it, but you don't use the technology. So that's more powerful if you have that in a written contract signed and chopped. Now, it's one thing to tell someone about it. It's another thing for them to actually do something with it and then try and use it. So if you have the non-use in there, that's more important. And the third thing is a non-circumvention. If you're working with a supplier and then you get a product, either you buy their product off the shelf or you get your product made, then you're selling it back in your home market. The non-circumvention means that they won't try to come around you after you've opened the market, found the buyers on your side, and then try and sell into your markets. So those 3 things are much more powerful than an NDA on itself. So as I said, in making payments, my talk again today is very general in nature. It's about how to protect yourself in the entire process. So if you can just make sure that you've identified your quality, you've done your due diligence, and when you make payments, that the name is the same on the business license and the bank and on the contract, you will be very far ahead in protecting yourself. So that's all I have today. Again, if you wanted more information, a lot of free information about sourcing, manufacturing, quality control, project management, all the things I've talked about today, feel free to go to any of those websites and check them out. All right.
Thank you very much, Brian. Is there any questions for Brian?
One question. Yeah?
So a lot of startups are going to have really specialized types of product. They're going to require specific types of tools or special IP. Is it still a concern that the factories in China might try to hold a tool over you if you don't have the proper protections in place? Or how do you deal with that kind of thing? And should people still be worried about that?
Absolutely. As I said, the first step in that process is knowing who's making the tooling. So if it's your main supplier that's doing that, then have a separate contract just for tool and stating very clearly, hey, I own the tool, I'm paying for the tool as the buyer, I own it, it's got my name and my serial number on it. So that way there's very clear ownership. State that in the contract to begin with. If he's outsourcing it to someone else, ask him who is making this. And with some injection molding tooling, there might be several suppliers in that supply chain. So you want to know who has control over your tooling, who's seeing the design, and who's manufacturing it, and making sure that the names of all those people are on your contract. So if there is a problem, then you can come to the Chinese government or to the Chinese legal system and say, this supplier, they closed down, or there was an issue with quality, and now they don't want to give me back my payment, and I can't get my tooling out of there. Well, now you have a contract, and with their name and their chop on it that says that you own that tooling. So it's much easier to get it back and move it if there's a problem. The other thing I didn't say earlier, and I'd like to say, in protecting your intellectual property, you can have all these contracts in place, which is great. It shows your supplier that you're serious. Maybe other buyers aren't as knowledgeable as you guys will be after leaving this show, but it shows your supplier that you're serious and that you know what you're talking about and you know what you're doing. But I also like to physically control that supply chain. And by that I mean, if you're having an engineered product being produced, well, maybe you buy the components from this guy, you buy the electric from this guy, you're getting the plastic components from this guy, the fabricated metal from this guy, the packaging from this guy. So now you're managing and you're controlling your supply chain, and then you're having all those components then delivered to a final location for your final packaging and testing and assembly provider. So that's one way that you protect yourself, that no one supplier in the supply chain sees the entire product, and you control them physically. And that's really, in my determination, the best way to protect your intellectual property. Sure.
Okay, as far as IP protection concerned, you just talk about how physically manage the supply chain and to monitor the situation and how to avoid it. Besides this, any other way to protect your IP?
Well, like I said, you want to know if you're relying on this supplier to manage the supply chain for you, and you want to know who are all those sub-suppliers and their names and their location and who the owners are, and that all of those guys are, all the company names are on your contract to begin with. You want that in place, and you want to physically control it. You can go through patenting in China. You can have your logos registered in China. That's a great way to do it. It's inexpensive to register your brand or your name or your logo in China. So that's another very powerful way to protect your IP.
Yeah,
and in your home market as well, of course.
Yeah, understand this. But if they cooperate with their supplier to use the third party to get those same set of BOM component and build the product on the other factories and ship to your location on the other channel.
Yep.
How can we avoid this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, as part of managing your suppliers, you want to monitor your suppliers. Come to the trade show. Is your product being sold in a trade show? Is it being sold online on Taobao or Amazon? So monitor some of these other sales outlets that might be infringing on your intellectual property. So it's up to you as the owner of that IP to not only make sure that you've protected yourself, but then to monitor the marketplace as well to see if it's being infringed on and sold.
So thank you very much, Brian.
Maybe one more question, or?
Hi, Brian. Thanks. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about controlling tooling and whether you would advise leaving it with the manufacturer between runs or removing it to paying to have it stored instead of them storing it for free where they get control over it, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's right. There are some steward providers where they will actually manage your tooling for you. They'll store it for you, take care of it, and then only deliver it to that supplier when it's being used. And if you say, and they can stand there and count or check the counter on the injection molding machine, you're going to make 10,000 units, so you make 10,001, and then they take the tooling and take it away. So yeah, if you're very concerned that there might be some funny business with overruns or making extra parts or someone else using the tooling to make the same product for themselves, there are companies out there where they'll monitor the tooling for you. They'll only deliver it to the supplier during the production run, count the number of parts that get made, and then take it away and store it for you until the next run.
And that's a realistic thing to do cost-wise. It's cost-effective.
Well, it certainly adds cost, depending on where your supplier is and where this service provider is. But generally, transporting even tooling, big things, heavy things around China is not very cost prohibitive. So if it's something that you're very concerned about, it can be done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just respond to you this is very my experience is very costly because transfer the mold inside China in different region of custom house. They need several kind of decoration and very timely and costly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, check into it. Ideally, the steward provider would be near or in the city where it's being made, the products are being made. Certainly you don't want to have a product made in Shenzhen and the storage in Shanghai, of course. You want to make sure that they're both in the same location generally. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brian.
All right, great.
For more questions, you are welcome to ask Brian directly at the floor. So thank you very much for your speech, which is very useful.
Thank you very
Please
much.
do a quick
Enjoyed
clap
it.
for it.
Or leave your business card at the back, and I'll be happy to follow up with an email or whatever works for you.
Thank you.